Okay, I make it midday, so I'm going to get started if that's all right with everybody. Welcome to whoever's with us already. Thank you for joining us. I'm actually really excited about today because I get to hang out with three people who wrote books I really loved. So I hope you all enjoy the session. We do have live captioning on today, but it is automatic. We're going to all try and speak as clearly as possible, but it is not a fail-safe method. So I apologize to anyone relying on it. And names in particular are something it doesn't cope very well with. So please bear with us while we're trying to be as accessible as possible. So my name is Felicia Willow. I'm the Interim Chief Executive at the Fawcett Society. The Fawcett Society is the UK's leading membership charity on gender equality. We campaign for women's rights at home, at work, and in public life. And in particular, we look at things such as women's rights to equal power, so getting women into positions of political power and representation. We campaign for equal pay. We also look at things like gender stereotypes and women's rights. We are a membership charity, and I would urge anyone who's interested in the kind of things we're talking about today to become a member of the Fawcett Society. A lot of the work we do is only made possible because of our members and the support they give us. So please do join and help us in our work. And moving on, I'm going to introduce our panel that we've got here today. We have Jill Whitty-Collins, who wrote Why Men Win at Work and How We Can Make Inequality History. Great start if I get the actual title wrong. Elliot Ray, who is the editor of Dad. And Philippa Roberts, who is one of the co-writers of Brandsplaining. So I'll give a proper introduction to all of them as we go along, but I'm going to start off with Jill. So Jill was born near Liverpool, the youngest of three sisters. After attending Cambridge University, she joined Procter & Gamble, where she led global brands such as Pantene, Olay, and Always, and swiftly moved up the ladder to marketing director, general manager, and finally senior vice president. Her story and vision will inspire you to join the force to make gender inequality history. So she's the author of Why Men Win at Work and How We Can Make Inequality History, which looks beyond the facts and figures on gender inequality to uncover the invisible, unconscious, and unintended barriers that sabotage women in the workplace. So welcome, Jill. Can you start off by telling us, give us a brief rundown of your book and also tell us what made you actually sit down and write it in the first place?
Thank you so much. I will. Hello, everybody. Yes, so, I should start by saying, actually, that I was not always someone who was this passionate about this issue, about gender equality. I've absolutely called myself a feminist now, gender equality warrior sometimes. I was not always so passionate. I was the third of three daughters. I went to a mixed comprehensive school. And my parents absolutely brought me up to believe that I was the equal of any boy or any man. I didn't even question that this would be an issue. And I absolutely believed I was anybody's equal. And I believed this for a very, very long time. I believed this, over 20 years into my career. And for a long time, I was one of those women really who just didn't see it as a big issue. I saw problems, but I did not see it as the biggest issue that we have. And then I saw it. And that really happened when I was at that senior vice president level. I was running the beauty business for Europe, India, Middle East, and Africa at the time. And it was the first time in my career, in my life, actually, that I'd ever found myself in a male-dominant culture and a male-dominant environment. So I found myself in board meetings and exec team meetings, which were 80% plus men. And I really felt the impact of that. And I really saw the impact that had on the women around me as well. And I realized that I'd just been really, really lucky that this had hit me so late in my life and in my career. And I know it hits many, many women much, much earlier. So I thought, okay, I'm lucky it's only happening now, but my goodness, it was happening. And my reaction was fascination, actually. I was fascinated by it. What is this? What's happening here? There are all sorts of things I could feel. So I really read a lot about it, read a lot of, every book and article I could get my hands on, actually. And obviously that's when I started to see the extent of it that you all very well know, that it wasn't about me. wasn't about the women around me, it wasn't about the men around me, it wasn't my company, it was just everywhere, everywhere that I looked, business, sport, politics, every company, every culture, this 50% of the population that is women, somehow as you went further and further up an organization, just eked away until at the top level it was less than 10% everywhere. And 7% of CEOs are women, 9% of heads of state. It's just, where did those 50% of women go? So I realized, obviously, yes, this is a huge issue, Jill. And I made myself a promise at that point that when I left that job, the first thing that I would do would be to write a book about it. And what really interested me as I was writing Why Men Win at Work was the why. Why does this happen? So many people who spend any time on this, they know the facts and the figures, but why does this happen? Why does this happen despite the fact that I deeply believe that most of the men on this planet are good and decent and are very well intended. I don't believe men wake up in the morning and think, how can I build a patriarchy today and destroy women and, kill their careers? I really don't believe most men are doing that. So why does it happen? And why does it happen despite the fact that anyone who knows the data knows that businesses and organizations that are run by equal groups and equal teams at that very senior level, diverse teams, deliver better results? It's pretty clear, and I think it's pretty obvious why when you think about it. So I was fascinated by why is it happening, because I believe that you can't fix something unless you really understand why. So the simple answer to why do men win at work? The simple answer is, actually, there is a simple answer, because the people who make the decisions about who to give a job to or a promotion to, they choose the person they think is the best person. Of course they do, they'd be stupid not to. And they believe, let's argue 9 times out of 10 for those senior jobs, they genuinely believe that the best person is the man. That's why they choose him, not because he's a man, because they believe he's better. But that can't be right, can it? Because, if women are 50% of the population, if we have equal intelligence, equal capability, equal leadership ability, which all the facts would say we do, it cannot possibly be right that 9 times out of 10, the man is the right choice. 5 times out of 10, you could argue, he is, but not 9 times out of 10. So for me, the real question that I wanted to penetrate was, why then do we usually conclude that the man is better, even a better performer, a stronger performer, more capable, with more potential, even when he may not be? And that is much more complex. There are lots of invisible, unconscious, unintended forces. I talk about the invisible power of culture, obviously, and how that affects belonging, performance, authenticity, the competence versus confidence equation, how important that is, how frankly seduced we are by confidence, and it can sometimes lead us down the wrong path. The umbrella theory, one of my favorites, and obviously the time issue and how that impacts women's ability to do their jobs on top of all the networking and self-marketing they need to do. And really this whole invisible ceiling that's created by all of these things. And then, what do we do about it? And I do believe that, yes, there are huge issues and many invisible forces, but if we understand them, we absolutely can fix them one by one. We can address them one by one. I really believe that we can do this, but it's a lot of work.
Thanks. I mean, one of the things I really loved about this book was the way that you came in starting off saying, I didn't used to see all of this stuff. Like, it's actually very accessible. And I think that it's readable by someone, I really enjoyed it. And obviously I spend my life reading a lot of feminist stuff in my role at Fawcett. But I think also it's really, really accessible to those people who don't get it. I definitely see this on my Christmas list for a number of people in my friends and family who still ask me, even in my current job, is feminism still really necessary? And you say, yes. And it's really accessibly worded, and I think that was that's what makes it really powerful. And it's not, it's not a huge tome. It's actually very readable. So I think if you can convince somebody who's a bit suspicious of it all to have a go of this one, it's a good thing. If anyone has any questions for Jill, please do put them in the Q&A. Obviously, for all of our speakers as we go through, put questions in any time. We're going to have an introduction from each and then come back to questions. If you could just, if it's for a specific speaker, please just put their name first so that we know who you want to address that to. Thanks for that, Jill. Really helpful. And now, Elliot. So let's see if I can get the name of your book right and what I did to Jill. So Elliot Ray is the author of Dad, Untold Stories of Fatherhood, Love, Mental Health and Masculinity, a deeply moving and inspiring collection of 20 stories that represent the diversity of modern fatherhood and seeks to start a conversation that challenges the traditions associated with masculinity. He's also the founder of Music Football Fatherhood, the parenting platform for men. He's also a speaker and experienced diversity and inclusion leader with specific expertise in gender, parenting and race. So thank you so much for joining us, Elliot. And can you tell us a bit of a rundown of your book and what made you sit down and write it?
I can. And thank you so much. First of all, it's an honor to be here. This is a real privilege, not just because of the esteemed panel and yourself as host, but also because I'm a man on this panel, writing about feminist books. And yeah, I really do appreciate you having me here. So for me, my personal journey is really what has led me to do the work I do. So I've always had a background in diversity and inclusion. I've been working in the Treasury and in the civil service in senior D&I roles. And when I became a parent myself, a father myself 5 years ago, it was quite a difficult start for us. We had a lot of complications during the birth and a lot of complications afterwards actually as well. And it was kind of touch and go how it was going to go for us. And over that, the months and the year that followed, me and my partner both suffered from mental health problems, and I was diagnosed with PTSD. And that is what has really driven me to, I guess, think about how do we support dads and how do we think about fatherhood a little bit differently. And also in that first year as well, I was very, very aware that the decisions that we made as a family in terms of how we're going to balance our work really did have a big impact on our careers, not just at the moment, but for the future as well. And so working professionally in D&I, but also kind of living it and breathing it myself, I became really interested in how do we kind of redefine this? How do we look at a little bit differently about what the options are available and why it is so easy to fall into what society puts us in, the boxes that we are put into? So that kind of led to Music Football Fatherhood, which is my platform. We've got a blog, a podcast, and the book is the latest baby that's come out of that project. And Dad is something that I'm so proud of. It's a as Felicia said, it's a really moving collection of stories. And when I say really moving, sometimes I feel like I'm just saying the words, but it really is really moving. These dads have written from their heart, and they've given us a level of vulnerability that I honestly don't think we have really seen before from men. And it's quite funny actually, because when I initially asked them to write for the book, they thought it was just our little old Elliot coming along and asking them to write a blog or something like that. They didn't actually realize it was going to be a hardback book available to buy from major retailers. And so we talk about it now and they say, I didn't know, if I had known, maybe I wouldn't have shared so much. I did say to them, yeah, I did tell you, but maybe you didn't believe me. But I think that kind of not knowing what it was going to become is actually the magic in it, because we've got that honesty and that openness and that vulnerability that is quite rare to get. So the dads are writing about topics like co-parenting, childbirth trauma, postnatal depression, miscarriage, shared parental leave, equal parenting, identity, all those kind of issues. And I think that what I want Dad to do is to, first and foremost, facilitate and encourage more open conversations within families, friends, and with colleagues as well, and to move forward those conversations we are having around mental health, around masculinity, and around gender equality for men too, within conversations for men. And I think it's interesting when we look at Dad as a feminist book, and I think it is a feminist book, and it's a feminist book for a couple of reasons. I think the first reason is because I and MFF are champions of redefining masculinity. And when I say redefining masculinity, it kind of sounds quite academic and it sounds like a theory, but for me it's very much a practice. It's something that we have to do. We can't change how men are and how men think and behave by telling them we should do it. We've got to do that by being it. So for me, Dad was not about preaching about what I think the world needs to do and how men need to move on and whatnot. It's about actually just living and breathing it. And the very act of these 20 men coming together and talking and being open and being vulnerable and really showing the world who they really are, I think for me is something that has already encouraged more men to have those conversations about what it is to be a man and to change their behavior as well. Just the last week, I got a message from someone who said that they gifted the book to their husband. He read the book and he has now gifted the book to his friends because they've realized they never had conversations about some of the challenges they had in fatherhood. And for me, that made me stop because I was like, that's exactly why we wrote this book. We wrote this book for men to read it and think, do you know what? I know my friend had a miscarriage last week and I haven't actually had a conversation with him. So now I'm going to give him the book and we're going to talk about it. And that really brought me to tears actually, because that was made all the work and the sacrifice worth it. And that is the book doing its work. So for me, I think when we want to move forward in terms of gender equality and we want to see a change from men, it's about redefining that masculinity. And I hope that Dad is helping to do that. And I think the other reason why Dad is a feminist book is because as a champion of equal parenting, I'm a big champion of equal parenting and having options for families in the workplace, options where dads can take extended parental leave, where they can work flexibly, where they can design their home life and their work life in a way that suits their families and their partners can do. And I think that's exactly where we need to get to. And I was very careful in the book, in the introduction. I wrote the introduction. It took me a year to write this introduction. So what I wanted to do is make sure that I am talking to men first and foremost, individuals about their challenges and recognize their challenges in terms of work-life balance, in terms of, being put in the traditional ideas of masculinity, around mental health, speak to them and recognize their challenges. But at the same time, be able to articulate that as a collective of dads, we need to do better. And it is quite a hard tone. So it's quite a hard balance because ultimately you're bringing people in and you're saying, I acknowledge you. I know what's going on. We are in this together. We are here to share and help. But at the same time, what's going on over there? We know these inequalities exist, especially from the last year and a half. We've seen, firsthand the inequalities when it comes to mothers and fathers in terms of more likely to be furloughed, more likely to be made redundant, more likely to take up most of the childcare in the home. We know these inequalities have existed in the last year and a half. So really making that clear and saying, as a collective of dads and as a collective of men, we need to recognize that and we need to have a national, global conversation about what we can do and what is our role in working towards that for the betterment of our partners, our wives, our girlfriends, ourselves, but most importantly, even our children. Our children having a man and a woman or two parents involved actively in their childcare, we know there's better outcomes in terms of educational outcomes and resilience and well-being in their early years. So it's about how do we bring men into that conversation, recognize their challenges, but say to them, look, we know we need to engage. And as Jill said, most men are good meaning people, but maybe they don't understand their role in society and understand how their individual decisions can help to frame the narrative and frame outcomes for the rest of the world. So for me, it's all about collective action. And yeah, that is something that I am, so proud of, so proud of. And I hope that everyone that reads it is proud of it too and learns something from it and shares it and has conversations. Ultimately, it's about open conversations around fatherhood with our friends and family and our colleagues. So thank you so much for having me. It's a real privilege to be here.
Thanks, Elliot. I think there's a whole interesting idea about the conversations because I read in your section, I actually identified quite a lot. I had quite a traumatic birth with my first child, and the way that PTSD afterwards, and the way I think that women are supported to get through that is we tell our birth stories over and over and over again. It's kind of, there's all these baby groups and places where, when you've had a child, you get this opportunity to kind of almost like work through the trauma of some of it. And I think that it really struck me when I was reading your book about the fact that men are not given that potential to do that. And Fawcett did a major research project into gender stereotypes late last year. And one of the things we talked about is the fact that suicide is the #1 cause of death amongst men aged under 45. Now, if that's not a reason that we should all care about things like feminism and equality, then, you know, I don't know what is, because that is a major problem. And I think that a lot of these kind of talking things and the ability for people to feel safe having these conversations is so important. And I loved it. I thought the book was beautiful. When you say moving, yes, I got many a tear in an eye, and, you know, a few chuckles in there as well. It is definitely a book that plays on the heartstrings, but is really powerful as well. So yeah, thanks. Again, if any questions, please just keep them coming in the Q&A. We'll come back to them in just a moment. So Philippa, over to you.
Oh, hello.
Your book as well. I have read all of these, not just flashing them around. So Philippa is the co-author of the book Brandsplaining, Why Marketing is Still Sexist and How to Fix It, with Jane Cunningham, published in April by Penguin. They are also the co-founders and directors of the research agency PLH, the UK's leading research consultancy specialising in female audiences. Jane and Philippa both began their careers working in advertising and communications agencies. As they rose through the ranks to become part of the leadership teams at DDB and at Ogilvy, they repeatedly noticed how female customers were perceived in ways that were at best inaccurate and at worst diminishing and dismissive. After over 10 years of attempting to right the wrong from the inside, they decided enough was enough and left to set up their own research company, PLH, with the specific intention of helping the marketing world better understand female audiences. So it's possibly partly answered the question of why you wrote the book, but tell me, give us a rundown of the book and why you decided to sit down and write yours.
Oh, hello. Oh, it's so nice to be here, and so nice to hear Elliot and Jill. Because like you, I've obviously read feminist books all the time, and I'm in this lovely lucky position where I'm researching with women all the time, and both Jill and Elliot's books are so good, and they bring these really interesting fresh insights to the thing. So and having read them, it's just lovely to hear them talk about them. But as to our the story of brandsplaining, I guess the story does begin about 15 years ago, really, when both Jane and I were working in ad agencies. And you would think that ad agencies, are not sort of places that are stuck in the past. They, style themselves and genuinely are in loads of ways really progressive and forward-looking, and certainly pretty open-minded and filled with lots of people who want to do interesting things, and lots of blokes actually who have got the very best intentions. But what Jane and I noticed when we were working in advertising and marketing is exactly the thing that Jill describes so brilliantly in her book, is one of those sneaky, unconscious things that was going on, whereby on the surface of it, it looked as if men and women in the workplace were completely equal, and men and women as audiences for marketing and communication were also completely equal. But actually, there was something really sort of sneaky going on, not deliberate, but what was happening was that the brands in the categories that were male, so cars, booze, beer, tech, telecoms, in those kind of categories, the creative work and the focus and the sort of status of those accounts in the agencies was really high, and they got all the creative attentions, all the excitement, all the sort of interest, and the attentions were on those accounts. And when it came to the female audiences, there was a sort of, it wasn't like that they were sort of overlooked or ignored, but they were treated in a much more superficial way. They were kind of glanced at as brands, and the audiences were certainly glanced at in ways that meant that they were really sort of shallowly depicted and understood. And it kind of led to lots of communications and brands for female audiences that were being produced that had much less focus and much less thought around them. And as a result, the work that got produced on those bits of business was much more superficial and shallow, and women were being presented in these very sort of 2D and often very regressive sort of ways. So Jane and I, having sort of noticed this, decided that we wanted to do something about it. And so we left our jobs and we set up this research agency that was designed to help brands and businesses and marketing departments get a much greater sense, a much deeper sense of what women were like and what they really wanted and needed from these brands and businesses that were meant to be serving them. And so we've had this like really brilliant 15 years of every week researching with female audiences and hearing what they think about the brands and businesses that are meant to be serving them. And obviously it's been such a fascinating time to be researching with female audiences, because we've had, you know, sort of fourth wave feminism, the impacts of Me Too, we've had all the kind of blurring around gender and definitions. We've had these really interesting and emergent debates around masculinity and what all of that means. So it's been such a fascinating time to be listening to women but about 5 years ago, probably 3 years ago, really, we noticed something was happening, which was that the marketing world seemed to feel that they had, if there had been iniquities before about how female audiences and how they were presented, the marketing world seemed to be labouring under this fallacy that the problem had been solved. And you've probably heard that awful word fempowerment and femvertising, which is obviously, we all know it, and it was kind of pioneered by Dove and actually has been mimicked in loads of ways by almost all brands in all categories. But the idea of using feminist empowerment messaging in order to promote and sell brands. And under this fempowerment banner, the sort of marketing world convinced itself, or we felt was convincing itself, that any wrongs that there had been in the way female audiences got depicted, that any of those wrongs had actually been righted. And in fact, the marketing was doing a lot to promote progressive and positive representations of women in the world. And that was not what we were hearing at all in our research. In fact, we were hearing quite the opposite. And so we then decided that it would be a very good idea to do a sort of state of the nation analysis of where marketing to women really had got to. Because, you know, marketing has this profound cultural effect, doesn't it, whether we like it or not. And a lot of people don't like it, but it's there all around us all the time. And what we believe and what the book explores and examines is that marketing in both overt and covert ways continues to tell women what they need to be like, how they need to be like it, and in particular, and most sort of depressingly and negatively, often tells women that what they are is not enough and that they need to change. So the book's in like 3 chunks, basically. There's the first bit looks at all the sort of base settings of marketing and the assumptions that inform the way marketing gets developed and the way audiences get seen and the way categories get segmented and the way propositions get developed. And we examine the sort of biases in those models and the results that come out of them. And that typically tends to be women cast in these very sort of narrow roles with a very narrow personalities that are typically pleasing, smiling, agreeable, and pretty passive. So we look first at those base models, and the second part of the book looks at where we are now, and that's where we look at femvertising and the impact that it has had, and where it's been positive and progressive and where it hasn't. And we also look at what we call in the book sneaky sexism, which is where the sort of the letter of the law is ticked, and the stuff that's done in a textual way appears to be benign, but beneath the surface, the old kind of tropes play out. So I guess anti-aging being described as ageless, or slimming being converted to wellness, or instead of saying for him and for her, as used to happen, communicating the same thing, but in a really coded way, using colours and art direction to indicate that certain things are for women and those certain things feel, you know, are typically very different from the sort of strong and highly defined ways in which masculinity gets presented. So we look at all that, the sort of sneaky sexism and the impact of femvertising. And then in the third part of the book, we then look at ways in which businesses and brands and the way in which we all consume can be developed in order to put forward a much more real and much more positive representation of women as they really are. And there are sort of 10 principles that we call them for how you can go about doing that. And I guess that if we have to try and sort of sum up the sort of move in the three parts of the book, in the first part of the book, in the base settings, the brand is talking to its audiences as if it's the master in charge of the relationship, telling women who they are and how they need to change, and usually spinning some kind of perfectionist ideal in order to tell them that. In the second part of the book, I guess we describe the role of the brand as being the patron, and in that sense, actually being continuing to be actively patronizing to women. So saying, we still know best, we still know better, it's all cloaked and clothed in this feminist clothing, but nevertheless, what we are still telling you is that what you are is not enough, and what you need to do is to change. And actually in the past, it was all about changing appearance and presentation, and now the sort of sneaky and actually arguably much more insidious thing is that brands are telling women how they need to change their attitude, how they need to be stronger, be bolder, to lean in, that strong is the new pretty. All those sort of motifs which actually continue to tell women what they are is not enough. And then in the third part of the book, it's about women made. And one of the amazing things that's happened over the time that we've been researching is that in the internet obviously has allowed and facilitated this extraordinary number of brands that have been made by women for other women, and for those brands to have a platform to communicate with their audiences. And so there are a whole number of really fascinating women-made brands that are now growing powerfully in the world and provide a really interesting template for doing marketing and brands in a different sort of way. So that in a nutshell is what it's about.
Great, thanks, Philippa. I mean, I found it really eye-opening. It was kind of that thing where suddenly you start looking at some marketing going, they're doing that way. And you think about some of the past ones, you're like, I can see how they did that. And I think I think you had a section talking about the You're Worth It campaign and how that was actually quite groundbreaking, but at the same time, it was still someone else telling women. I thought that was really interesting. So yeah, fascinating kind of eye-opener. And all this hidden things that we don't always see until someone points it out, and then you're like, wow, it's everywhere.
I know. And well, exactly. It's exactly as Jill and Elliot says, isn't it? We all are on the receiving end of all of this stuff all of the time. Absolutely. And most of the time we don't notice it, but once you do start noticing it, you can't stop seeing it.
And it drives you crazy. So you've got to do something about it, which all three of you have because you've all written these books. So I'm going to move on to some Q&A now. So Jill, somebody has said, I'm curious to know if you attended a co-ed or a girls' school growing up. As a girls' school alumni, I found a similar experience in that I was unaware of any gender gap until entering the workforce in a male-dominated field. Even though I had male counterpart trainees, I was often given the more administrative or reception type tasks within the business, while male trainees got the more number crunching IT roles, even though we were employed on parity. Do you have further thoughts around this in context of the modern workplace?
Yes, so I actually was at a mixed comprehensive school. So I wasn't at a girls' school. And my experience of a mixed school was, I came out of it with a lot of confidence. And, I always laugh because I was bright enough and really no genius, but I was really organized and quite what we called back in the day swotty. So I was top of the class in most things, even things I'm really not naturally gifted at. So it gave me confidence. I didn't question the equality, but I also know that women who've gone to girls' schools, that's also can have a really positive impact on the confidence, because there's not that distraction. All of those negative dynamics that happen in school for girls. I mean, I think perfectionist syndrome is created in schools, to be honest, more than anywhere else, and it's a horrendous thing. It's a curse. So I know a lot of women who got a lot of confidence from their girls' school, but then, as you say, they then went out into the workplace and had exactly the same, realization that I did, which is, wherever we've come from that made us believe that we're equal and we're going to be treated equally, was a little bit misleading. And, I think it's a really difficult one, because, most parents, I think, doing a fantastic job to build confidence in their girls and send them out into the world with that confidence. And that's fantastic. And I wouldn't change that. But I think equally, we need to make young girls aware that we wish we were sending them into an equal world, but we're not. We're sending them into a gender inequality issue. And it's actually, yes, be confident in yourself and your strengths and what you bring, but also be aware that this is out there. There are forces that are going to come and get you. They'll get you eventually if you continue your career. So better to be ready for them, prepared for them, because you'll manage them better. And I tell you, I was not prepared for this at all. And people say to me, Jill, I wish I'd read your book 10 years ago. And I say, my love, I wish I'd read my book 10 years ago, because you really need to see this stuff coming, because it can knock you absolutely sideways if you don't, I think.
Thanks. So we've got a couple of questions for Elliot. Somebody's asked, are all the dads in a heterosexual relationship?
So we've got a story from Michael, who's a gay dad who went through surrogacy. So that's a really moving story, actually, about the surrogacy process. I learned loads. I didn't know anything about surrogacy before. So yeah, he's a gay dad, and I wanted to make sure that we did have that diversity. That was really important for me as well. So we do have Michael included.
And another one for you was, as a dad, what are your top 2 tips for parents on parenting your children to support gender equality?
Big question. So I would say, again, the practice. I think when your children are young, it's about encouraging them, supporting them to do the things that we traditionally wouldn't think they would do based on their gender. Mm-hmm. So, for example, taking your daughter to go and play football if she wants to, or the sports that traditionally boys would do, and vice versa with your boys, taking them to the ballet or something. So I think there's those kind of things, looking at their social circles, who do they play with, and helping them to not see gender for the girls as a barrier, or for boys as something to identify others with. And I think having a daughter who's 5 myself, I see it, I can see that now. And even when we go to the park after school, there's a lot more boys there. And I always think about why is that? Is it that the girls don't want to play in the park so much? Or is it because maybe the parents see the boys and think, oh, it's not for girls? So I think there's things that we do as parents that really can shape our children's experiences, and then we should work really hard to think about that. I think the second thing is around when they're old enough, obviously age appropriate, is, as Jill said, talk to them, let them know the realities of the world. And that should go for characteristics of, gender, race, ability, loads of things. We need to educate our children on the realities. And we have to do this in a way that it's not going to scare them off or not going to make them disheartened, but just the realities of life. And as Jill said, then we can help them to actually kind of navigate this world that they're going into. So, I don't know yet. So I don't know what the right age is yet, because I have a 5-year-old. Maybe other panel members might know more than me, but, I'm assuming in the teenage years, when they're becoming young adults, to have conversations at that point, I think is a good thing to do.
I have a 5-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter. And it's been a really interesting experience being someone who really wants to raise your children, challenging gender stereotypes. It's one of the things I found actually is when my daughter started going through the princess phase, which I understand is quite common, I found myself, because she was my first, I hadn't had a boy yet, so I hadn't been able to kind of like push princesses on him, but I kind of was like, oh no, princesses, I don't want you to be that kind of a girl. And then I realized that actually what I was doing was being quite sexist as well, because like I was almost saying something that is traditionally associated with being girly was bad, whereas actually it would have been better if she'd been doing something masculine. And it really made me kind of challenge some of the ways I was trying to challenge her gender stereotypes with some of the kind of insidious messages I had in my own head. And similarly with my son, I think people are much more likely to push their girls towards, traditional traditionally masculine activities than vice versa, and really trying to kind of, you know, face that and do something about it, and you know, send your boy off to do things that you know, and tell him that things are fine, you know, certain colors are fine and there's nothing wrong with that, and you know, just making it really normal. But it's really, it's been a very interesting experience having one of each, and questioning some of those things in myself, who's, you know, rampant feminist. You know, it's like realizing that these messages are everywhere. So I've got one for Philippa here. So, okay, they've said brandsplaining, you say, is data-led analysis. I've just read Weapons of Math Destruction. How, therefore, since the erasure of women was discussed in that book, does this impact your data? Is it positive or negative? Are you familiar with that book?
No, I'm not. I'm not. Sounds very interesting. I will familiarize myself.
And then Philippa, another one for you. I am a full-time wheelchair user since 1984. Hang on. It just moved. There we go. And have struggled with assumptions around disability, as well as being a female trying to find a role in employment. Do you feel your research has highlighted that, and do you feel it is being addressed?
We don't directly look at that. No, look at that question. Although it would definitely be true to say that in the marketing that we did look at, in the content analysis that we did, it was very clear that any thing outside of that very narrow definition of what women are, so women of anything outside that, the white, slim, pleasing, youthful presentation, was pretty unusual to come across. So vast swathes of audiences overlooked by brands, in particular women of colour, in particular women over the age of 40, in particular women, poorer women, and women with disabilities. So there are big, you know, the focus of marketing continues to be on that very narrow Western definition of what a woman should be like, and that good girl ideal that plays out as both as, you know, a little girl, as man-pleasing teenager, as, you know, hot, sexy bird, as in ideal mother, as in then women almost disappearing off the scene once they get over 45 in terms of the way brands look at audiences. So anyone outside, who sits outside of that definition, it tends to be overlooked and therefore very underserved.
And yet have money to spend, which should be the guiding factor, you'd think, with some of these companies.
Yeah.
But Jill, what advice would you give to someone who's currently within a team where certain male colleagues take up a lot more space than women, despite being technically outnumbered? Have you found any ways to broach conversations around reining in what is seen by leadership by ambition rather than behavior, which is having a possibly unintended negative impact on the others in the team?
Yeah, I mean, it's a super difficult one. Yeah, if you're in a male dominant culture, I mean, if you're in any dominant culture and you're not part of that culture, it's extremely difficult. I mean, let's flip it. It's so easy when you're part of the dominant culture, isn't it? And we've all experienced that. It's just, if you're in a dominant culture, if you're a male dominant culture and you're a man, you feel belonging, you're relaxed, you're confident, you perform, you just, you know, you're talking, you're just showing up really well because you're so relaxed. And obviously the opposite is true. And I think we really see that in meetings. I think that's in my experience, the place it was most obvious was in that meeting room where the dominant group were basically, it was invisible, but basically they set the rules of how the meeting was played, and, you know, who got to talk and who got to get interrupted and who got to finish and who didn't, and all of that stuff. So it's a difficult question to answer, because on one hand, I honestly believe that you cannot change a dominant culture if you're not part of the dominant group. The only people who can change the dominant culture are the dominant group, who have to make that choice to say, we don't want this. We look around us, everyone looks the same. Most people look the same. This is a diversity issue. We're not getting the best input. we're not getting the best ideas, we're not getting the best innovation, we're not making the best decisions. You really need that dominant group to have the awareness to recognize that this may feel really comfortable and nice, but it's actually really not good for our team and it's not good for our business. So on one hand, I kind of think, you know, I tried. I think you can waste a lot of time and energy trying to change a dominant group that you're not running and not part of. Having said that, because it's not always possible to walk away, my first inclination is have a go. But you know what? Ultimately, if you are not valued and not listened to and not seen, and others who you believe are not as good as you are seen and valued more strongly, there has to be a point actually where you walk away. So I would say, yeah, you know, have a go, but ultimately walk away, take your talent and brilliance elsewhere, where you will be valued and you will be heard and you will get to speak, and what you say will truly be listened to and respected. But before you do that, you know, give it a chance. You know, there are, as we've said, there are a lot of fantastic men out there. There's one on this, one talking with us today. Give them a chance. Just because you're in a male dominant group and it's working this way doesn't necessarily mean that they can't change it, they don't want to change it. So give them a chance, point it out, and speak from your own strengths. You know your own strengths, invest in that, you know, find that confident core in yourself of, you know what, I know I'm good at this stuff. Bring that, give them a chance to respect it and listen to it and find room for it. If they don't, be ready to walk and take it elsewhere. But you know, give them a chance. I can't tell you, over the last year since the book was first published, I've had a minority of, I have had literally fewer than a handful of men writing to me negatively. I have had hundreds of men writing to me saying that they understand, thanking me for the book, telling me they understand this issue in a way they never did before, telling me they're doing something differently today because of it, and telling me basically that they absolutely want to be part of change and they want advice on what they need to do, because there are a lot of men out there who understand gender equality is not about women. It's not about doing something for women. Gender equality is for everyone. Everyone benefits from it. Elliot is telling you he wants it. He wants gender equality. We all want it. So give them a chance. And then if that doesn't work, walk and go somewhere else.
And buy them a copy of this book.
And I forgot to say, Felicia, the paperback is out on August 1st. So that's been exciting because obviously since it was launched, we've had this rather small incident of a pandemic, which has raised so many interesting things about gender equality in the workplace and at home for all genders. So we've added a chapter about that, winning at work after COVID, and there's a foreword from Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Manchester. So that's out on August the 1st as well. I should have said that earlier, but there's some new stuff in there. But for anyone who's read it and feels like they know everything I've got to say, we've added some stuff.
And I should say, Fawcett doesn't get anything for promoting these books, by the way. We just genuinely think they're fantastic books and they're contributing to the kind of cause that we're working towards. So I just thought I should say, in case people are there going, she must be getting paid because she's really pushing these books. It's like, no, just genuinely think they're fantastic and are what we need. Elliot, so someone has said, I co-chair the Women's Network at the Co-op, and we're making a big effort to bring all our colleagues together behind gender equality, regardless of how they identify. How can a broadly female colleague network invite and encourage men to get involved without appearing to be patronizing or insensitive? This is something I get asked a lot too, actually, so I'd love to hear what you're going to say.
Good question. So I think this is the core of the work I do, actually, is speaking to networks and organizations about bringing men into conversations around gender equality. And the way I normally do that is by kind of meeting the men where they are. So what are the issues that are important to them? It's normally around, fatherhood is a massive one. Mental health is a big one too. And using those conversations to bring them in, to hear from them. Normally I will speak a little bit and I will give some context and tell some stories, but really to center them, to get them on platforms, on panels, get them sharing their stories, talking about their experiences. And when we can engage them in that way and say, look, we understand, a bit like the book, we understand that you have massive privilege, but also you have some challenges. Also, you want to see and have options to do things differently. Okay, now let's have that conversation about equality, about women's experiences, about mothers' experiences, about what does your decisions and your behaviors, how does that impact your family and the workplace? So I think it is first and foremost having people that can speak to those men in, that are like them, that can come from a kind of shared experience. I think they're much more likely to, unfortunately, likely to engage in that way. And then when they're in that space, making sure first and foremost you are talking to them about what impacts them. That's going to get them in the room and get them interested. And then once you've got them hooked, then you can feed them all the other stuff. And I think that's generally a good way of involving, engaging people, but also long term. This shouldn't be just something that we do as a one-time event and people are engaged. Great. It's about how do you keep them engaged. And I think you do that through role models. You do that through senior leadership, through policy. There's loads of different ways. So we can definitely talk afterwards if you want some advice on that.
Great, thanks. There's another question here that's really for everybody to answer, and I think it's a really important one. They've written, I think all women share some commonalities in the feminist struggles we face. However, I often find I have to work harder to find a feminist book or movement which addresses the unique challenges faced by ethnic minority women or women from different classes in the workplace. Do you have any thoughts on this, and how do we ensure that feminism reflects these views or contexts? And before I throw it to the panel, I'm actually going to talk a little bit about what Fawcett is working on at the moment, because we've actually been working on a fairly major piece of major research project looking at the pain progression of women of color. Now, the term women of color is obviously a very big umbrella term, and what we're actually trying to do is break that down into individual groups of women and from different ethnic minority backgrounds to understand what their experiences have been. So we've had a series of focus groups with say, a group of Chinese women, a group of Bengali women. These are all women, obviously all British women, but with the ethnic heritage that has then affected their experiences in the workplace. And so far, we've gotten as far as the literature review, and we're halfway through the focus groups, and the work I've read so far is really fascinating. So I think it's going to be a really important project that comes out in about March next year. So do stay tuned for that. I think that it is really important. And what the literature review showed us was that there wasn't much work being done to actually break it down. And when you lump these categories of women together as if they're one group, you're missing a huge amount of difference between the different groups that we have. It's like the term BAME and BME, it tends to group people together in a way that's not always helpful. So that is something we're working on at Fawcett, and is really exciting. And I'm looking forward to finding what our researchers reveal on that. But I will now throw it open to the panel. Does anyone in the panel have any thoughts or ideas about books that are out there, or things that are being done around those kind of questions?
Well, one of the things that we always try and do, you have to be, and it sounds exactly like the work that you're doing, you have to be really, really conscious of it, because the bias in the system is not to notice it. So one of the things that we do with our research is we always try to ensure that in the recruitment of respondents for the research, that we are getting proper representation of all the different groups, because as you say, the tendency and the sort of base setting is just to think, oh, all women who are this age group or of this socio-demographic group, and to overlook other factors. So we always try to be very active in the way we recruit, and that does help and does ensure that those voices get properly heard.
Actually, it's interesting, because I think one of the other things our literature review revealed is that a lot of the research that's been done previously is asking employers what they think they should do, or doing a bit of getting a bit of information from the women who've had these experiences, and then deciding what should happen next. And actually, one of the things that we're doing in the project as well is actually saying to women, what do you think should happen next? And really trying to get those voices centered, because it's, I'm a very strong believer that you can't be a feminist without considering intersectionality, and no. Gender equality is not working on its own in a vacuum. The experiences of inequality are different for all women, and it's a very complicated issue, but if you ignore it, then you're not going to get anywhere. So right, okay, sorry, just looking back, I got distracted chatting, and now I don't know which one I was going to ask next. Okay, there was one I was going to ask. Here we go. One for Jill. how much does the assumption that women will leave to have children impact why men win at work? My husband and I have always seen each other as equal. We're the same age and enjoy our careers. Now we're pregnant. Nobody's asked him about how he's going to balance his career, yet lots of people ask me. I identify this with this question. This is why I wanted to ask it as well. I constantly am told how good my husband is because he does half the school pickups. And I think, well, am I good? Because I do the other half. Nobody ever tells me I'm good.
I love this question. Honestly, I could talk about this for hours, and I know you don't want me to, but absolutely, this is massive, right? And it's a massive inequality that we need to get rid of this. And it's so simple, actually, to get rid of this. I am a passionate believer in gender-neutral parental leave, and by the way, gender-neutral flexible work policies in general. And truly gender neutral, and truly not just on paper, but absolutely in practice. If we lived in a world where we absolutely expected that a man was just as likely to go off for, let's say, 6 months parental leave as a woman was, we can have a debate about whether she needs a few extra weeks for the biology, but broadly the same. If we lived in that world where truly every company, and some do, by the way, some companies have it, some countries have it, but they not only have it as a policy, but when the man requests it, no eyebrows are raised, no twitching, no, well, John's not very committed to his career behind the back of the hand. None of that. It is as normal for a man to do it as a man, as a woman. And flexible work as well. So many men have said to me through this last year, Jill, I want, because I'm always saying we will not be 50-50 at work until we're 50-50 at home. And I have so many men who've come to me and said, I want to be 50-50 at home, but this is in no way enabled by my employer. My employer is ever so flexible for all the women, but not for the men. The men are absolutely expected to be delivering in exactly the same way as before. No extensions on deadline, nothing, no flexibility for the men. This has got to change. If this doesn't change, if we don't change the policies, and if employers do not genuinely mean it when they say these policies are gender neutral, we will never get to it, because we will continuously just reinforce these stereotypes that ultimately we say what we say, but ultimately deep down we all have this imprinted belief that it's the woman's job to be at home with the kids and do the school pickup, and it's the man's job to bring home the money. And you know what, some men want that and some women want that, but that, for what I know, the majority of women, they want to be mums and they also want a job or a career. And the majority of men I know, they want to work and they want to bring in money, but they also want to be dads. And I think all genders want all of it. And we keep forcing mums and dads into these little boxes, as Elliot said. And it's got to stop. And I think gender neutral policies, they are such a simple answer. We could fix this in a matter of months if we really went after that.
Interesting. Fawcett's actually got a campaign at the moment around shared parental leave. It's in partnership with a number of other organisations in the country, and we're campaigning for 6+6+6, which is basically 6 months of maternity leave, then 6 months protected leave for both partners, so that it's a kind of take it or leave it opportunity. And it is something that a lot of research shows that would make a big difference to things.
It benefits everyone, right? There's so much data that if a man takes parental leave, decent parental leave, he'll be 50-50 for the, not just during that leave, but full time, and men want it.
We're going to have to wrap up because it's the end. I will just do one more plug for membership for the Fawcett Society. We are a membership organisation, so please do consider joining us. It's the lowest level of membership starts at £1 a month, so it's really not very much, and you make a big difference in us being able to carry out a lot of these campaigns and the kind of work that we've talked about today. I would like to say a huge thank you to Jill and to Elliot and to Philippa. I loved your books. They're brilliant. Thank you so much for also coming and chatting to me. It's such a privilege to be able to get the people who wrote the books I really love to come and talk to me. So thank you so much. Does anyone have any last thoughts they'd like to say before we hit 1 o'clock? Jill, any last thoughts?
I just, thank you so much for having me and for putting me together with these other two brilliant people as well. These are fantastic books. Elliots quoted in my book because he's so brilliant, and Philippa and Jane's book Brandsplaining will have you laughing out loud by the end of page 1. So,
Elliot, last thought. Oh, sorry.
Just for me, what a privilege has been. This is my last thing until I go on holiday, hopefully on Saturday.
Happy holidays.
And thank you. It's been an amazing way to sign out for the summer. So thank you so much. It's really been a privilege. It's really been an honor to be here, and I really appreciate it. Thank you to Philippa, Jill, Felicia. It's been amazing. Thank you so much.
And Philippa, last thought.
Oh, thank you to everyone, and thanks to everyone who's come to listen. I think there's been a really big theme, hasn't there, which is about gender equality not being a women's thing. It's a for everyone thing. And this sort of narrative that we've had up till now, which is it's all about fixing the women or women changing in order to make this thing happen, that is changing in a way that is so exciting, because everyone is waking up to the fact that it's for the good of everyone. And this is a male, female, any gender conversation that everyone needs to have. So it's been lovely to have it with you all. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. And also thank you to Hermione, who's behind the scenes today, and to King's College London, who've done a lot of the legwork to make all of this possible. So I think that's it from us. So yeah, have a great day, everybody, and go and get your hands on these